In the previous lesson, we looked at how we can simply load contents of a file and load it into our HTML page. So I've actually copied the code out from CodePen and I've brought it over here in order to demonstrate this particular functionality where we're doing a get and a post, because the get and a post they have the ability actually to send information over to the server, so we can either just do a quick get and retrieve back that data. So I can show you what that looks like. All we have to do is essentially we can update the load to a get instead, and this is essentially going to allow us to load that content. And we do need to make a few updates here because we don't want to load it into output, but we need to specify the value of output later on here. So we need to place it down here as the HTML. So we've got get, we've got the path to the file, we've got the function. So we're going to create a variable there to hold that information that gets returned back, and then within here is where we're going to place that returned data. So let's try this out now. Whenever we go over to the page, we click it, and we see it's still not returning the data properly. So let's take another look at this, and just to make sure that we've got the path correct. So whenever the button gets clicked, we're firing off and sending over a GET request over to this URL, and then waiting to retrieve back the data, and then that data that gets returned back, we want to deposit it into output. And I want to add in a console log of the data so we can actually see the data coming through, because we're not actually going to be able to read the data as it's formatted because it's in a JSON format. So let's refresh this, and we see that we're still retrieving back that object, but we need to make sense of this object because we've got all of this information contained within this object, and now we need to utilize our JavaScript and actually output some of this content properly. So we've got a series of different, so we've got one called first name underneath this object. So let's try outputting the first name or something like that and selecting a particular piece of the returned object that we're sending over to get. So we see that we are getting back that first name, and it is in an object format, so now we can utilize it really easily within our JavaScript just by treating it as we would any other object within our JavaScript. So the data is the return value of the object. We're console logging it out, that's where we're able to see it within the console there, and then we're outputting it. So we wouldn't normally be able to see that object information, but we're being specific on the value that we're trying to retrieve back from the data object, and we're looking for first name specifically. And we can do the same thing for any one of these items here within this object. So it's here we've got number of children there, so we've got first name, last name. Phone numbers is an array, so we'd have to loop through that array. Address is an object in itself, so we'd have to go deeper to get those returned values back as well from that particular object. And with the get method, we also have the ability to send over values. So I did create an input field here called first name, and I could send over in a value. So if I have a server here that can pick up a GET request, and I've written up a quick little PHP file here called php.php, and essentially what this is going to do is this is going to listen for any GET requests. It's going to take that value of GET, place it in name, and then just simply write that back out. So essentially whatever data we're sending into our PHP file, either GET or post, it's just going to be returned back, and we're going to be able to pick that up using our jQuery. So typically you would have quite a bit going on here within your PHP file, some more processing and so on. So you'd actually have something real and something happening with the data that you're sending in, but this is just for demonstration purposes in order to quickly illustrate the ability of picking up data within your PHP file and providing a different response back for the JavaScript. So we could do something like returned and then send that data name. So now instead of going over to this path, let's do php.php. So this is my local file, and I do have a local system running. So we see that we get returned just default data. So if I say something like test in there, so we got that default data. So we're not actually able to output anything meaningful yet within here. Let's take a look and see what's coming back here. So we're not returning back anything with any real meaning. We're just returning back that data value there. And this one right now, it's not gonna work with the first name because that was just for that JavaScript object. So now we can see that data is being returned there, just default data, and it's getting that value from the value of name here. So I do need to save that and refresh it, and now we can see that we're still returning back that's just that default data. And we do have a way to pass through this name value into our JavaScript and send it over to the server. So let's add that in. So if you remember that how we set up, and we could set a variable to contain that first name. And with jQuery, we can pick up the value of the name within using the selector. So we have an item here within our code called first name. So we're just going to make a selection of that and select out the value that gets returned there. Now the data has to be formatted in an object format. So this is where we're going to specify a field name for name, and then pick up that value off of my input field. So it doesn't work exactly like you would expect with a typical form field where you're submitting it, where we have to specify the name of the GET request that's going to get picked up within the PHP file. So we've got name, and we're specifying that first name value, and this is going to be the entire object that we're sending over. And then all we have to do here, so maybe this isn't exactly right, so we could just call it objects or something like that. And this is where all of our data is contained. So I'm going to put that into there, and let's refresh that. So now we're actually passing over some information, and we see that the server is picking that information up when we click it, and it's getting returned get, and it's getting the value from the input form. So although it doesn't look like it's really doing a whole lot, it's doing a full round trip, sending that form information over to the server. The server is doing something with that form information, although not a lot within this example, but it is doing something with it. It's taking that input in and returning back a value there. And one last example I wanted to do within this lesson is that we want to go over and show you how to do the getJSON value. So this one is going to be different because we're going to use that file, that online file again. So getJSON is the method, and I'm going to pop back out to here and copy and paste that URL back again with my JSON bin there, and we're going to use that file. And we don't need to send over any additional data, so we're not sending any data over there, but we're still picking up that data there, and we're going to create a brand new output field here. We'll just call it output 1 so that we can see that data once again coming in. And this case, we need to format that data, so first name. And let's try this one out now. So when we refresh it, so we get that first name returned of Lawrence, and we're getting all of that information within that getJSON format. So very similar to the get, but getJSON is more specific for JSON data. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at posts and the ajax method, all from jQuery. And it's going to be so easy to load data and interact with external file data and also server data using jQuery.